How we doing, Pat? We ready? Here we go, folks. Are you excited? It is a great night to be here at Valley Presbyterian Church. We want to give an Arizona welcome to new Arizonians. They have moved from Pasadena to heaven in Sedona, or at least close to heaven. If maybe this is heaven in Paradise Valley, but it is wonderful to welcome two distinguished professors and teachers, and most of all, great Christian disciples who are going to talk to us about how to become a reconciling presence in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, and in our world. So it is Terry and Sharon. Let's give them a big round of applause. And I'm just going to pray to start this whole thing. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the calling, the big calling to be your ministers of reconciliation in the world. We thank you for the opportunities you give us in relationships with folks we already know intimately and with folks that we're acquaintance of, and even with strangers that you'll bring into our lives. Equip us, challenge us, form us, and shape us for this great task. We ask it through Christ our Lord. And all God's people said.
Well, it's really Sharon and I's privilege to be here with you. We love this place. This is my fourth visit here, and every time I come into this place, I see something new and get a better feel for the place. You all have done marvelous work, not only to make this aesthetically pleasing, but emotionally pleasing. And so thanks for letting us be here. Sharon, you need to stand up so that people can see you. So, yeah. Sharon's going to take part. We kind of do tag teaming, but I wanted you to get your eyes on her because she by far is the best part of my life in terms of what we do and how we relate to one another. We've been married 42 years, but that's only part of it because we met in 8th grade English. And so we've known each other 52 years of our lives. So it's a lot of fun hanging out with her. And like Dave said, we're now in Sedona. So we're learning the whole Arizona thing. I want to start out with you. You know, we want to talk to you some about the idea of how do we get through this? You know, the title of what we came up with at this thing is how do we stay together when the world is tearing itself apart? It really is a scary time, an unprecedented time. We have a dear friend who was an Army Ranger during the Vietnam conflict, and so he was right in the middle of everything in 1968. And some of you remember 1968 is sort of maybe the most polarized time in our history up until 2016 through present day. And I asked him, I said, you know, all the strife and all the protests, all the Tet Offensive, so many things going on in 68, the Chicago Democratic National Convention, it seemed like we were tearing it apart. Which do you think is worse, more polarized? He said, without a doubt, it's now. It's now. And therefore, we really have to face this. We have to figure out how Christ would have us at this time. But I want to remind you, Christ came at a pretty polarized time himself. And so we have some good leadership around this issue. I want to read you a story that I've found particularly helpful over the last couple of weeks to me. It's a story you're familiar with. It's from Luke chapter 7. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, bought an alabaster flask of ointment, and standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair on her head and kissed his feet and anointed them with ointment. Now, when the Pharisee who invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known what sort of woman this is that is touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering him, I love this, that he just thought it, but Jesus answers him anyway. Simon, I have something to say to you. Simon says, say it, teacher. A certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. And when they could not pay, he canceled the debt for both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon answered, I suppose the one for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning toward the woman, so you can almost see this, then turning toward the woman, this is what Jesus says. He says, do you see this woman? So he turns toward her, but he's obviously talking to Simon. He says, do you see her? Do you see this woman? Do you really see the person that is standing in front of you? And then he says, let me tell you about her. I entered your house, you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. You know, Sharon was out of town. We were on we had a couple of days away. She had to go to a meeting. And I got so tied up with so many things that I was having to do. When she came home, even though it was just a short absence, I was kind of inattentive. I was kind of out of it. I was more concerned about what was going on with me than I was concerned about what was going on with her. And Sharon finally looked at me and said, what's the deal? You look like you're someplace else. And when I heard this story and read it again anew, I thought, yeah, that's exactly what was going on with me. I was in the place where I was loving little. You know why? Because I'd forgotten about the 52 years that I'd spent with this woman. I'd forgotten how desperate my life was when I first met Sharon. I'd forgotten how she swam out to save me, first through a friendship and then marriage. I'd forgotten how essential her family was to actually building my sense of identity and sense of safety. In other words, when I showed up on the scene in 8th grade English, Sharon saw me, and she loved much. All of us here have times where we love much and we know what it's like to be loved much. And we all have had times where we love little. And it could be for any number of reasons. But somehow we lose touch, right? That's what I want to talk about in terms of where we are today. We are in a crux of something where, boy, it's the most polarized time. So whether we're talking about sexual identity, whether we're talking about politics, whether we're talking about the last election or the election before that, whether it's talking about masks, no masks, vaccinations, no vaccinations, abortion rights, whatever we're talking about, it is polarized. It is difficult. And if you get too involved with that, you find yourself loving little. Because you're so used to being assaulted in so many different ways in terms of your senses, in terms of your reasoning, in terms of what you think is right or wrong, you forget. Oh, there was a time. And I guarantee you, there's that time for all of us. There was a time where you were desperate, where you were lost. And yes, my friends, there was a time when you were just dead wrong. And so therefore, when we come to this framework, I want us to always remember what our goal is here, is to love much. Learn about how we are, but also love much because we've been forgiven much. We have grown much. And we have much to learn about how to face this kind of polarization in our world. Does that make sense? So one of the things that we're going to do, Sharon, if you'll come up, we want this time to be a dynamic time where we actually share with one another. And wherever you're sitting, find somebody else or 2 or 3 people, it doesn't matter. And we have some short discussion that we want to do.
So what we want you to think about are these questions that we have up on the board, because the last 5 years, as Terry's talked about, have been disruptive in many ways. And we've had to face a lot of issues together. But there's probably been some positive things that have happened in your relationship in the last 5 years. For us, during COVID, our children all live in New York City in very small apartments, and somehow they thought being in California for long, extended periods of time sounded more fun than being in New York City in the middle of winter in 1-bedroom apartments. So we actually got to see our family more. And then in the last 5 years, what relationships have deteriorated and negatively impacted you? We've also had a lot of disagreements with our adult children about how to handle COVID and some of the things that we've had to negotiate. So you don't have to answer both questions. I just really want you to think for a minute, how have the last 5 years impacted me either positively or negatively in my relationships? Now that can be with people here at church, that can be with family members, that can be with coworkers, any relationship that you choose to talk about. So if you'll just take about 3 to 4 minutes in groups of 2 or 3 and just talk out loud about one of these questions, we'd really appreciate it. So let's just talk about that a little bit as a group. Just give me some feedback a little bit about what positive or negative things that you've seen either in your relationships or relationships around you. What are some of the things? Yeah.
We've got twin boys, grown boys, successful in their lives, married well, good families, but they disagree vehemently over politics.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's been tough. It's
Yeah.
been tough for us. I mean, Sharon just woke up just this last week in the middle of the night, worried about them.
Yeah.
Stewing.
Yeah. Yeah. Generations have ended up on different sides of a lot of these issues. We certainly don't agree the same with our adult children, and that's made for uncomfortable situations around the family dinner table, maybe some uncomfortable situations about how you handle what you say in front of the grandchildren or what you don't say in front of the grandchildren. It's created a whole lot of issues that 10 years ago it didn't seem to be so divided, at least. We could think differently, but it wasn't so divided. What else? Yeah.
I think that I'm less trusting of the public in general. Let's say I'm going to a grocery store 8 years ago compared to now.
Yeah.
I am wary or thoughtful about or wondering about or mindfully critical of people in the grocery store getting too close, or you wonder, are they vaxxed? Are they not vaxxed? Are they this? Are they that? And I never really to be in a grocery store was a very neutral situation.
Absolutely.
In the past years. Now it's not. Now I don't ever go to the mall. I'm the worst kind of shopper.
Yeah.
Online is fine with me.
Yeah.
But to go to a grocery store when it's an unknown, and so there's a level of, it's not exactly distrust, but there's a level of
Wariness. And that happens in spaces that we used to walk into and feel comfortable. Our children's schools, our church, in places where we used to walk in and not think too much about the relationships or what was going on because we felt comfortable. This whole idea of, do you agree with me? Do I wear my mask? Or is somebody going to be mad at me for wearing my mask? Or what is the perception of me going to be because I have a mask on, or that I don't have a mask, or whatever? So you walk into the world kind of tentatively. A lot of times we don't have even casual conversations that we used to have with people to build relationships like we used to. One more.
Can you repeat?
Yes. Yeah, she was just saying walking into a grocery store, you can feel uneasy because you don't know what people are going to feel like. There's a bit of tension. Yeah, what else?
I just thought of it. We now have moved into a retirement community in the independent area, and it was the buzz about getting the vaccines.
Yeah.
And I was hesitant. I wasn't sure if I wanted to, and we were in a group setting outside someone's patio, and I voiced that naively so.
Yeah.
And the evil eyes went around the table,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, I won't say that again. But it was that kind of a thing.
Yeah, moved into a new retirement setting. Wasn't sure how she felt about the vaccination. Was she going to get one? Was she not? Sitting in a group of people, made that comment, and then saw the evil eyes looking around at each other. So you can just make a comment in a new group of people, and suddenly you're on the outs, or you make a comment and somebody really reacts to you, and you're trying to establish yourself as a person. One more comment. Yeah.
Everything has become weaponized.
Yeah.
The masks, the vaccines, schools. I mean, everything in our lives have become weaponized, and you're either on one side of the fence or the other. There's no in between.
And everything's become weaponized. Mask, politics, schools, everything. What is that doing to our relationships? You know, it's destroying and tearing apart our relationships where we used to could sit at the dinner table and have a calm conversation about what was going on in the world and what was happening. Now we got to be careful, even with the people that we're closest to. And we can't even walk into a new group of people and what are they going to think about me? And what are the people at church going to think about me? And what am I going to do about this issue with my kids' school and how I feel about what should be happening? And all I want to do is just fold up by myself and not argue with people. I just want to be in relationship. So.
Yeah, and I love that comment that everything is now weaponized, right? And we tend to think, you know, what happened to our world? You know, it just fell apart on us. You know, it's like we've all had our opinions, but now it's like this is like total war. And make no mistake, friends, this is a dangerous war that's going on. I mean, if we look at this time historically, this is as bad as it has been since the Civil War. And we've been through some really bad times in that 150-year period. But this is big stuff that's going on. Here's the bad side of it, though. You're part of the problem. Yeah, all of us are. All of us are, because we think, oh, yeah, it's not me. It's all those other yahoos that are out there. I'm not weaponizing anything. Here's the problem, though, is that if you're a human being, you've gotten caught up in this too. And it's not necessarily that you're so bad about it. It's that it sneaks up on you. Because you have certain thoughts and opinions and things like that, but you know the weaponization just as well as I do. And when somebody gets extreme, you start going, I think that's just flat wrong. Or they shouldn't think that way. Or they're being rude. Or they're being out of hand. Or something is gone awry terribly. And you turn it over and over and over in your mind. You ruminate on it. The more you ruminate on it, the more you turn it over on your mind, you're going to tell yourself more and more how wrong that other side is, or that other person. And saying, it's not me, it's them, right? And so we ruminate. And then you tend to triangulate. But you don't triangulate with just anybody, right? Triangulate means that I bring other people in on how bad I think the other person is. And who am I going to go to talk about how wrong I think somebody else is? Well, it's not going to be the other side. I'm going to go to somebody that I'm pretty sure thinks or acts or is part of my people. And so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to confirm just exactly what I've been ruminating on. Yeah, they are wrong. Can you believe that? Can you believe what they just did? Can you believe that they're not vaccinated? Can you believe they're wearing a mask, not wearing it? I mean, it just runs amok, right? And then it's just a matter of time. Because after you ruminate on it a while, after you triangulate and get people on your side, you're going to feel bold enough eventually, or somebody's going to press your button enough where you are going to zing somebody. You're going to retaliate. You're going to make somebody pay. You're going to act out either through aggression. You're going to really get big with somebody and get angry and kind of, tell them how the cow ate the cabbage. Or just as damaging, you are going to withdraw. You're going to say, this is just too dangerous. And I don't want to get into an argument. I don't want to make anybody feel bad, especially myself. And so I'll just... and you disappear. Let me tell you something, and you know this, some of you grew up in an aggressive, angry family. Some of you grew up in passive, withdrawing families. I tell you, you are equally screwed up. This thought that angry people are the only ones that are damaging passive, withdrawing people, it is just as damaging to relationships. And many times in this weaponized world, you will end up retaliating by your withdrawal, by your disappearance, or you'll manipulate the situation. You'll try to get somebody else to do your dirty work for you, or somebody else to, I'll support you, you get up and say it, and I'll go and stand behind the lectern or something of that nature. Yeah, we all do this. This is human nature. In other words, this is common to humanity. All of us have been part of this, because you just can't exist without doing it. And when you start doing that, when you ruminate long enough, when you triangulate, and you finally retaliate, then you jump on the crazy train. All of us do. We get on the crazy train in various ways. This is how we do it. Maybe you're one of those big people, aggressive people. You stay angry, sarcastic, you get so critical, and you look so powerful, intimidating to people that what do? They're frightened. And they're tentative around you. They're like they're walking on eggshells. It used to be that we just had this with Uncle Joe at the Thanksgiving table. Now everybody's Uncle Joe, right? We've got the problem everywhere we go, and it's frightening. And so we think, I don't, and some of you have turned into Uncle Joe. You use your anger and your kind of bigness and your power to intimidate people. Some of you, the one below that, you make people feel like you're unapproachable. That's because you overmanage and you kind of mind read. You decide. You sum up what everybody thinks. You sum up why they're wrong. You kind of put them into polarized positions. And you say, I already know what the story is. I know who's right, I know who's wrong, and I know what's wrong with you. That makes you unapproachable. And then some of you, the withdrawers in the group, the people that you invent ways to stay away from relationships. In other words, you make excuses. If the excuses don't do it, then you'll say, well, I'll have other competing activities that I have to do. I'll make myself so busy that I won't be able to make human contact. And make no mistake, some of you numb yourselves to the point where you just don't care about relationships any longer. This looks terribly uncaring to others when you withdraw to that extent. And then some of you take it so personally, you get so hurt that you consider, well, there must be something wrong with me. It must be my fault that the world is falling apart. You act so weak and needy that others don't want to burden you with anything else. So they just flat leave you alone because you look fragile to them. Well, all of us in this room, we have our favorite methodology. Some of us will be angry, and that's our main deal. Some of us will be over-controlling or mind-reading, manage everybody else, and if they'd just listen to me, they would be okay. Yeah, some of us are like that. Some of us are withdrawing, we disappear, we look uncaring, and some of us take things so personally, we just look so doggone fragile that we can't handle the world. All of us, this is common to humanity, and all of us have to take a look at ourselves, and we have to determine, do we do this? Well, so this is sort of the checking in. Perhaps you or someone you're in relationship with would be described as one of these characteristics. Maybe you or someone you know is frightening or uncaring or unapproachable or fragile, especially about conversing about the touchy subjects of today, whether that's sexual identity, politics, elections, masks, social justice. It doesn't matter. Most of us are terrified by what's going on. And we either get big and get angry, we either slink back, we avoid it, we either summarize it neatly in a rational way that we don't really have to deal with things, or we take it terribly personally. What's your experience? Tell me, when you run into somebody like that, all right? When you run into somebody like that, when you run into a person that's frightening, that's uncaring, that's unapproachable, that's fragile, how do you react? In other words, after one of those interactions, how does it feel for you? Think for just a second. You don't have to blurt it out, but think, how do I react? If you're like most people, if you're like part of humanity, you probably do one of those things yourself after you feel that way. If somebody gets big and angry, you might get angry yourself. Or you might get very, very logical and super controlling, or try to read into the situation. Maybe you take things personally. Maybe you would just withdraw. You see, here's the thing that you need to know, is that all of us have these problems. These are common to humanity. So when we run into them, we tend to do that which is done to us. Now, not 100%. For instance, some of you, when you see somebody get angry, you tend to withdraw, or you tend to take it personally. When you see somebody that's over-controlling, maybe you get angry. But whether it's because you frighten people, whether it's because you're unapproachable, whether it's because you look uncaring, or whether it's because you just look fragile, those things deteriorate human relationships. They make relationships more difficult. And in a polarized society, that's where we are. Make sense? Yeah, question.
Now that we're all asked to be 6 feet apart, doesn't that create an unapproachable approach?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic hasn't done us any favors, right? Not only do we have certain opinions about it, but we also say, all right, now, depending on how you feel, because this is a controversial subject, good science tells us that we need distance also, right? Or we need masks. And so some people say, well, no way. Is there such a thing as good science? This is one of those touchy subjects that we have to talk about. But yes, that's exactly right. So when some people say to you, you're going to have to stay 6 feet apart, you see what your next move is? Some of you will get angry. Well, I'm not doing that. Some people would say, well, let me explain this. Some people would say, well, I'm not going to bother with it. And some people will say, I don't know whether I'm staying 6 feet apart or not. Am I too close, too distant? You see, that's the issue.
Can I say something positive about COVID? Sharon and I have taken care of each other. And, we didn't say anything, you did the question up there, what's positive last 5 years? We've taken care of each other, and that's positive. And, you take care of your family, you take care of what's going on. And, it brings people closer. So so I want to say something positive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's like, church. I mean, go figure. We never went without church. We went Zoom. We got to go together. And I was so grateful for that. So I want to say something positive about all this because, we stick together. We can help each other. And we can take care of each other.
Absolutely. Just because we're talking about the problem that separates us out, absolutely we want to talk about why we need to stick together. That's the whole title of this session, is to saying, yeah, how did we get here? So we want to talk about the problem, but we also want to talk about, but it's important that we stick together, and we have good reason to do that. And in many cases, we have stuck together. Yeah, Sharon and I say this all the time, right? All this stuff that I just said about the bad stuff that exists in you, you're not bad all the time. You're just bad when you're bad. And when are you bad? When you're dysregulated. But you're good people. We all have this stellar part of us that comes out when we help one another, when we see each other in the real flesh. And that's a beautiful example of how you're taking care of one another and saying, well, the problem just isn't with us. It's also historical, all right? Oh, yeah, there's that too, right? We got some things that are going on that make it more difficult. First of all, we have a 24-hour news cycle that's going on. This has been, in fact, this is an artifact of 9/11. In 2001, we started being addicted to the idea that we have to know 24/7 what's going on. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Social media has exploded. And most of that is unedited and very, very little restriction around the idea of social media. Networking and profiling, especially in social media. In other words, there's algorithms that put together so when you spend time liking something or reading something, the algorithm is paying attention to you in social media. So guess what you get more of? The very thing that surely you've noticed that if you do online shopping, that all of a sudden you get the bigger and better and the more items from that particular store. The algorithm is watching you. And so it's sending you the same information. So if you think a particular way or you have a tendency to focus on those things, that's the information that you're most exposed to. Make sense? Government, by the way, and this took place about 15 years ago, they removed the restrictions. There used to be this idea that any kind of media served a information purpose for society to do good. Therefore, there was a requirement of equal time. In other words, if you presented one idea, you were forced by the FCC to present the other side. That law no longer exists. So therefore, you have a lot of entertainment that goes on. The idea that we'll only present one side because we want to shape a certain clientele because our advertisers like that. Extreme thinking then adds to that idea of, and we invent conspiratorial theories on both sides of the issue, by the way. It's not just one side versus the other side. Everybody has their conspiracies, and those conspiracies assume the worst of the other side. And then people disagree on what the truth is, right? Is that any surprise? Yeah, and here's the thing that might shock you, especially for this age group that's in here, is that 30% of people get their news from social media, which, you know, a lot of us would argue that's not news, right? In other words, the information that I receive, the only information that I take in, is not from a news source, it is from an opinion source that is propagated. Does that make sense? And so, yeah, that makes it more polarized. Make sense? Yeah, so what's the big deal? You know, here's the good stuff, right? What we want to say is, so what's the big deal? So what if we're polarized? You know? What's the big deal? Well, this is a big deal because Jesus states clearly we're people who abide and commune with him. In other words, the people that all of us. Now, I gotta tell you, I'm just as guilty as you are, just as what everybody is. We are part of the system that tends to focus too much on what's wrong with the other side. I am that person. I struggle with that because I don't like the opinions or thoughts or tactics of certain people. I want to say, they don't belong to me. They're on the other side. I tell you, gang, I don't see how we can read Scripture and come up with any other option except Jesus says, no, they belong to you too. You know these verses. One is from John chapter 6 where Jesus is talking about, you know, you need to eat my body, you need to drink my blood, because I'm going to start abiding in you and you are going to abide in me. We're part of the same substance. If you want a more pleasing way of talking about that, go to John 15. I am the vine, you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. I am in you and you are in me. In other words, we take on the personhood of Christ in us, the Spirit of God. And as a result, we join in the resurrection, the suffering, and the spirit of what God is doing in the world. We don't have a choice. If we're going to commune, there's going to be a whole lot of people that are going to come along with us. Even ones that think wildly different than we do. This communion extends to the whole church in relation to Christ. Remember Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, that idea that, yep, we are one body. And there are different parts to the body, right? I love this out of Ephesians 5. You know, Paul is talking in that chapter about submission of wives and husbands loving their wives. But he sums up the chapter with this. We usually think that Paul's comparing marriage to the church. Actually, it's just the opposite. He's comparing the church to marriage. He says this, he says, the mystery is great. No, first of all, he says, for a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. He goes, the mystery is great, but I'm talking about not husbands and wives. I'm talking about Christ and the church. In other words, the church is not just you. It's everybody that's so opinionated and so polarized from where you are. The very people that you think are destructive. You may not like their smell, but we're kind of stinky ourselves. We all need one another. This is clearly the command of Christ. Even if we go the direction of saying, well, those people aren't part of the church. They're not true believers. Well, guess what? In the Sermon on the Mount, what does Jesus say? You've heard it say, love your neighbors and hate your enemies. What do I say? Love your enemies. You have to love your enemies. Yeah, whether we like it or not, this is what goes on.
So, one thing that we just want to talk about is this whole idea that we're called to be one. We're called to be one in the body of Christ, and we're called to be one with one another. Now, when we originally think about oneness, a lot of times we think about this idea of marriage. Actually, we're all called to be one, but this is in Genesis, where it says that a man shall leave his father and mother and a wife her husband, and the two will become one flesh. Well, I don't know, for those of you in the room that are married, I don't know if you got married like I did, but Terry and I got married like a lot of people do. We were in our venue, which was our church, but now everybody gets married at their venue. And I was dressed in white, and Terry was dressed in black, and we came together, and we stood, and we looked at each other, and we said some words, and we turned around, and they introduced us as Terry and Sharon Hargrave, and we walked back up the aisle, and we were still two different people with two different sets of friends and two different jobs and two different ways to clean the toilet. That ceremony did nothing that actually made us feel like we were one. And we began to think, becoming marriage and family therapists, you got to think, okay, what does this oneness really mean? And we talked and we thought about things like covenants and contracts and a lot of things that make sense when you talk about marriage. But we never could really put it into words that resonated with us. And then Terry had the opportunity to eat lunch with one of the major family therapists at the time, a man by the name of Carl Whitaker, if any of you in the room are therapists. Carl Whitaker was one of the founding fathers of the field of marriage and family therapy, and he was the founder of what's called experiential therapy. So Carl might do something like fall asleep on his clients and see how they react, just to learn about who they were as people. So he was random in how he did things. Well, in the middle of this random breakfast where Carl was talking about this and that and everything else, in the middle of this random breakfast, Carl looks at Terry and he says, Terry, when Muriel dies, and Muriel was his wife then of 53 years, he said, I will miss her. But more than missing her, I will miss who we are together. Doesn't that sound like a beautiful picture of oneness? When we think about it, and if you're, work in the marriage field at all, you have your circles on how you draw oneness and everything like that. But as far as how Terry and I draw it, we think about this whole idea of in our couple, there's Terry and there's Sharon, and between us, there's this invisible entity called us. And us is a little like Terry, and it's a little like Sharon, but it's totally different than both of us. Us does things differently than Sharon would do them. Us does things differently than Terry would do them. I could give you a million examples. The thing that I love about usness is that I am better because of Terry. I am better because I have learned from him. I am better because he and I have learned how to work things out. I am better because of him. An example that I would give you would be the whole idea of parenting. Terry and I don't like to stereotype much, but in parenting, we were the stereotypical, biblical probably parents, as I was the nurturer. I was a person who thought our children should never feel any pain whatsoever at all. He was the person that believed we were supposed to raise responsible adults, right? So when our kids were about 4 and 6, we had this magic insight, and we noticed that by the time Terry got home in the evening, I only worked part-time when our kids were young, the kids were whining and fussing and crying, and he would walk in the door and he would restore order. And then we began to notice we were the bad cop and the good cop. And I was the good cop because I was giving them everything they wanted, which when you give children what they want when they whine, what do they do more of? Whining. Exactly. And so I had to learn that part of being a good parent was to discipline. But the interesting thing was when I was too nurturing of our kids, then Terry was shot out here to be this extreme of too much of a disciplinarian. So as we learned in our oneness, that I needed to discipline more and he needed to nurture more, our kids got two good parents. Two parents that knew how to both nurture and discipline, and not just one parent or the other parent. I could give you a million examples. Think of the last church committee that you served on. I'm a dreamer. I love to think about, all the many, many things Valley Presbyterian Church can do. But don't ask me to put a budget or any details to it. So if I get on the committee with the budget detail-oriented people, I can either get frustrated with them and pull back from them and cut off from them, or I can form an us with that person that I connect to. So in this time and in this world right now, we are called to be one with people that we don't necessarily agree with. I don't know if y'all have the memory of where you were when COVID started happening. Terry and I were in Atlanta, and I worked for Pepperdine University, and Pepperdine University actually called me and said, leave your conference early, get home now, they're gonna shut down all the flights. It was kind of an end of the world kind of moment. And in that end of the world kind of moment, our son and his wife, who are both in the entertainment business in New York, called us and said, we're going to get on a plane and we're coming to LA because we don't want to be in New York when it shuts down. My daughter then got angry at my son and my daughter for getting on the plane and coming to see us thinking that they might give us COVID. And she kind of pulled back from the family for about 3 months because she was so upset that we let them come and they didn't quarantine when they got there. But August came around and our daughter this year called us and told us they were going to go to Disney World in Florida with their 2 children. This oneness of this family of mine, how have we done this issue from her being so angry to now she's going to Disney World with her 2 children? And how do we learn from each other, and how do we understand one another, and how does we still be one as a family with these extreme views that are going on? And it's all about becoming one. And over the next, Terry's going to close us down here in a minute, but over the next 3 weeks, hopefully what our desire to do is to help you understand how to become one in the body of Christ, and how to be one with your family, and how to be one with your church committee, and how to be one with the people that you serve with, because as Christians, that's what God has called us to be.
So, do you see this man? You see this woman? We need to think this week in terms of loving much. Because those people that we just can't believe think like they think or do what they do, they actually belong to us. And we, my friends, are more like them than we think. We need to see one another. And what we're going to do over the next several weeks is we're going to learn how to see one another and actually speak to one another in constructive ways. Now, we're not going to oversell this. We're not saying, oh, we're going to solve all our problems. But hopefully by the end of our time together, you'll see that we'll need to stick together. So remember, we need to see one another. You need to understand that you're not so different. You have some problems too. And that we don't have the option of jettisoning people. These are people we all need, and they need us because we're all in this together. Let's pray together. God, we thank you that you are a good God, that in the midst of a definitely worse time than we find ourselves in a polarized time, where people were threatening and killing one another, you didn't kick anybody out. You were for seeing, bringing together, and managing, even when that seemed impossible. But it wasn't impossible. God, give us hope, give us courage, and lead us in this process of becoming us. Amen.